According to Eric Katz of the Government Executive, in 2015, the U.S. federal government reached an all-time high of 72,000 full-time permanent employees with disabilities. This marked an increase between 2013 and 2014 from 12.8% to 13.6%. In 2001, disabled workers comprised 8% of the federal workforce. This means that over 1 in 10 government employees has a disability. This is significant to the federal IT leader because this represents a significant growing portion of the federal workforce. Approximately 1/4 of GS-14 or higher positions are filled by an employee with a disability. The number of staff in the federal workforce with a disability continues to grow. According to the Department of Treasury's Judgment Fund Payment Research Tool, in 2019, over $4.3 billion in agency funds were used to settle lawsuits against the federal government or its employees. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, there were 14 disability settlements levied against the U.S. government by federal employees at a combined cost of $1.6 million in taxpayer money that could have been used to provide services to the U.S. public. All 14 cases required that the subject agency reimburse the federal judgment fund. That means that over 1/4 of lawsuits brought against the federal government were self-inflicted by its own workforce for disability-related unfair treatment. In addition to mitigating a potential lawsuit against an agency, Section 508 awareness is about doing the moral and right thing by offering a reasonable accommodation whenever possible. Therefore, awareness of Section 508 and reasonable disability accommodation matters to the federal IT leader. Now that we as federal IT leaders understand the so what of why Section 508 awareness is important, let us look at what we are going to talk about today. Remember that there is a lot of disability-related information available, so today we are limiting our discussion to the U.S. federal workforce. Next, let's hear what Yvonne has to say about federal compliance resources.
Thank you, Mark. Two familiar laws associated with federal compliance for Section 508 include the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that requires that when U.S. federal government agencies develop, procure, or maintain information and communication technology, that it is accessible to persons with disabilities. Another act that we're familiar with is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, amended in 2009, which was the first major legislative effort to secure an equal playing field for individuals with disabilities. Other pertinent laws include Telecommunication Act of 1996 that requires telecommunication products and services be accessible to persons with disabilities. And most recently, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010. Which identify laws enacted in the 1980s and 90s that need to be brought up to date with the 21st century technologies. Well, for more information regarding policy standards, state and international policies, and other related laws, visit the General Service Administration website at www.section508.gov. Thank you.
Wow, that was great, Yvonne. Thank you for telling us about the role of federal compliance and Section 508. Next, let's hear from Chris, who will share with us what he has learned about training resources and material for our organizations. The floor is yours, Chris.
Now you may be feeling overwhelmed at some of these federal regulations and scary settlement numbers. But don't worry, it's easy to stay on the right side of the law. This presentation is giving you an overview, but there are many in-depth resources you can find online and from your local EEO folks. The first place to start is something that you've already heard, the Section 508 website. Its address is super easy to remember. It's section508.gov. Lots of other agencies have made their training available on the public web. Of course, if your agency has specific training, you should start with them. The Federal Acquisition Institute offers information for acquisition professionals. The Department of Homeland Security has also made their training available online. Many federal training contractors offer classes at a cost. If you are interested in an in-person class, this may be a way for you to go. Searching the interweb for instructor-led 508 training will provide you with ample results. And now, back to Mark.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing information about available resources for Section 508 accommodation. Next, let's hear from Michael, who will share some examples of reasonable accommodation with us.
What's needed to be 508 compliant? All digital content. This includes websites and web applications, mobile applications, documents including Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, Excel files, and PDF files. Section 508 requires that all website content be accessible to people with disabilities. This applies to web applications, web pages, and all attached files on the intranet as well as the internet. Here are some tips and suggestions for 508 compliance. Users must be able to navigate your website without the use of a mouse. Users should be able to use the tab button on a keyboard to progress through any given page. Images must contain descriptive alternative text, alt text, so people who are blind have an appropriate description of the image. Images that serve a structural or navigation purpose also require alt text. Here are additional tips and suggestions for 508 compliance. Color contrast for colorblind accessibility. Make sure the graphics will adequate foreground and background color contrast to make the content accessible to learners with color blindness. Tabbing for screen reader accessibility. The use of JAWS Access with Speech, JAWS, screen reader for visually impaired learners, allowing screen reader tabbing. VoiceOver for vision disability accessibility, using recorded voiceover context to help explain complex conceptual issues and maintain transcripts of the audio to include on every related page in course. Accessible PDFs. NASWA and DOL provide accessible versions of downloadable PDF with proper tags and readable text, no scanned text or images. Drop-down menus. Another object that is taken for granted by most course designers is drop-down boxes. Even though these widgets can enhance the overall design of the course, they are not Section 508 compliant and need to be avoided at all costs. Here are some accessibility checkers that you can use in your daily work to be 508 compliant. Word has an accessibility checker that you can use. And also, Adobe has a PDF accessibility checker. With this all being said, now I turn it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Michael. That was a great rundown on some examples of assistive technology and reasonable accommodation in action. Today, we talked about the so what of why Section 508 awareness is important to the federal workforce and especially the federal IT leader. Well, that's all that we have to share with you today. You should have a good understanding of why Section 508 is important to you as a federal IT leader. Thank you, Yvonne, Chris, Michael, for talking to us about each of your areas of expertise, and thank you to Patrick for building this video.